cities and places are living entities that are constantly evolving to meet the needs of local residents. Well, in today's Vital Living Forum, we'll explore how communities are responding to the needs of a rapidly growing older population, a demographic cohort that is projected to double in size to 95 million Americans by the year 2060. Now, the goal is to create livable communities for all, and joining me is Jeff Johnson, the State Director of AARP Florida. Jeff, welcome back. Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be back again.
Have you. So why is AARP working to make communities more livable?
Well, we've learned from AARP members and others that they want to stay in the community that they're currently in really for as long as they can, and they want to continue to be active. And when you think about a lot of the communities here in Central Florida, they're built for families, and that's a wonderful thing, and we need good family housing. But sometimes a home in a neighborhood and a community that works well for a family might not be quite the same for somebody who's aging in place. And so AARP has worked on this age-friendly network of communities to help cities and counties and states even who want to figure out how we can be a better place for people of all ages, from the very young to the very old.
So when we say livable, how do we define livable?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we talk about a livable community, it's a community that has the built environment that works for people of all ages, so housing and transportation and public spaces. It also has a social environment that works, a place where you can stay engaged as a citizen, as a volunteer, as a worker in the workforce. And then it also has the communications and health systems that you need in order to make it a place that really is a wonderful place to live, no matter who you are and how old you are.
So what is the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities?
So the World Health Organization actually launched an age-friendly network of communities about a decade ago. And in 2012, AARP said, let us help build up the U.S. communities that want to be a part of this. And so this is a framework that the World Health Organization has that AARP operates. And there's hundreds of cities and counties across the country that have joined this effort to try to figure out how they can do what works for that community really well.
So how does this age-friendly platform help to make communities more livable?
Well, for one thing, we have at AARP experts, not only our own, but certainly ones from around the country and around the world that we're able to bring to this network so that they can offer advice about things that have worked in other parts of the world. We also have done a lot of research around what works in housing, what works in transportation, some of those physical things that can help city planners, as well as how you build a volunteer infrastructure or a social infrastructure that works well. But the main thing, frankly, is communities learn from each other. So what works here in Orange County might not work in Miami-Dade County, but what works in another part of the country might work great here too. And that ability to share across communities has been the real strength of this network.
So is the age-friendly network and livable community effort the same thing?
They're in many ways. So what I would say is livable communities are something that people across the age spectrum can think about and work towards, and there are a lot of different ways to do it. What the age-friendly network does is take specifically an aging lens. So often when we think about how we make a community great, we think about how we make it great for us as individuals with our own perspectives and biases. An age-friendly network allows us to open that up to make sure that as we're planning for people at age, whatever the age, that we're thinking across the age spectrum as well.
So how long has AARP been working to build these livable communities?
Well, in the U.S., we started in 2012 with about 8 communities across the country. And it was really 2015 when we really started to pick up steam here in Florida. So it's been less than a decade. In fact, the first communities that have really joined the network have gone through this 5-year process. We have just one time and are just beginning to re-up for a second round. So it's still very new, frankly, and people are still learning about it.
Speaking of learning, so Florida's a great place to learn how to do that. And what have you learned about building these communities since you've started?
I think the biggest thing that we've learned is that, first of all, you have to start by listening to the residents of that community, because they'll tell you, here's what's working, here's what I wish was different. And as a result, what works in one part of the state doesn't work in another part of the state. So one of the great things about Florida is that it is so diverse. You have so many different environments. And even just within Central Florida, you have very rural communities, communities, you have very urban communities. And to learn from the residents what works makes a big difference. But the other thing that we've learned is that an age-friendly effort only works if everybody is at the table and everybody is participating. It's not just a governmental initiative. It's something that requires volunteers, it requires civic organizations, businesses get involved, and that's how you get a solution that works for that city or that county.
So can these same efforts be integrated into other community efforts so that, like you mentioned, the families and then the independent living adults, how does that work together?
Absolutely. The way we look at this, the age-friendly lens is something you can bring to all the work. So on the coast of Florida, obviously there's a lot of interest in resilience and climate change, and certainly that's true across the state too. Many of them are using the age-friendly lens to try to think about, okay, how does that look different for an 85-year-old than for a 10-year-old? Similarly, as we see cities try to approach how we manage urban growth and development, people are thinking about, okay, as we're planning for the 20-something, how can we also make sure that it works for the 80-something? The real effort here is to kind of inject an age-friendly lens into all the other work that a community is already undertaking, as well as perhaps to create some new initiatives.
So how does a community join the network of age-friendly states and communities?
You know, so there are a lot of certifications or programs where you need to fill out a huge application and take a number of steps. You get a plaque, you put it on the wall, and then you're done. And that is not what this is. This is really just the opposite. So a city or county just has to say, look, we want to figure out how to get better. We want to assess where we are and get better. And if you fill out a very short application, then we'll include you in the network and then begin you in this process. And the process starts by just, again, asking residents what's working and what's not, and then developing an action plan that works for that community. It's a 5-year process. The idea is you plan, you implement, and then you evaluate how the implementation works and get ready for the next cycle. So it's a relatively easy program to get into, but it's one where it's not just a plaque you put on the wall. It's an opportunity to continue to work and grow.
And Florida is special. And are there things that are different here that might be different than in Arizona or in California in building an age-friendly community?
Well, there's absolutely special in so many ways, right? And one of them is that this is one of the few states where the aging population is growing and the young population is growing. So in many states that we talk about as aging states, they're aging because young people are leaving, and that is not the case here. We also have, Arizona may be in some ways similar, a lot of folks moving here from somewhere else. And I think one of the maybe most unique things that Florida has, it has to do with the social component of aging in a community. People come here from somewhere else, and a lot of times they think of living in Florida as kind of an extended vacation. And the reality is most of us don't make friends with our neighbors or get involved in the community where we go on vacation. And so one of the challenges I think that Florida faces, and Florida cities and counties are trying to think about, is how do we get the folks who are phenomenal people who have come here from somewhere else, whether they're 25 or 85, to really engage and think of themselves as Floridians, as people from Central Florida, as people from Orange County, because we could use their contributions to make this an even better place to live.
How about the multi-generational households that are very popular these days, and lots of people are starting to sort of see, grandma and then the great-grandkids are in the same house. Does that influence how you build an age-friendly community? I
really think it does. I think that for a generation or so, we tended to segment out people, right? People who retired to a retirement community. And Central Florida has a lot of 55-plus communities. I think what we've seen in this generation is that there's immense value to having communities with generations that are learning and living together. And that does change how you build a community. One of the things that's valuable and kind of a positive here is oftentimes the things that work for an older person also work for young families. So for instance, when you think about putting in sidewalks with curb cuts, so you don't have those big curbs, that works great for a stroller, it works great for a wheelchair. So thinking about how we make a community that works for the very old and the very young is a great way to build a livable community. There's a saying that folks who are in this work say that if it works for an 80-year-old and it works for an 8-year-old, it's going to work for everybody.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thank you, of course, for that summary about livable communities and the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities. And in our next segment, we're going to hear more about the 8 domains of livability and some examples of what communities are doing to become more age-friendly. Welcome back to the Vital Living Forum on livable communities, and we're back with Jeff Johnson. And joining us is Ingrid Collins, AARP's Associate State Director for Central Florida. And in this segment, we're going to be focusing on how a community's social environment, health network, and communications efforts help build a livable community. So starting out with you, there are 8 domains of livability. Jeff, what are they?
Right. So the 8 domains of livability come from the World Health Organization. 3 of them around the built environment. So you think about transportation and how you get around a community. You think about housing that is appropriate for people of all ages. And then you think about the public spaces, the parks, buildings, things like that. So then there's also things like communication and having a good health system. But then the social environment is one that people often can't quite put their finger on, but they know it when they see it. Are there fun things to do for people of all ages? Are there ways for people to get involved and stay involved at any age? And is there respect and inclusion of people of all ages? Or is it something that a community only cares about the young or only cares about the old? Those are the 8 domains in a nutshell. And obviously that covers a lot of the waterfront of what makes a community really livable.
So what are the 3 domains of the social environment, and what are each of those domains trying to accomplish?
I think I think that in general, the social domains really try to make it a place where you feel like you're at home in a community. So when you think about, are there ways, if you're in the workforce, can you continue to work in the workforce and find meaningful work that you enjoy and that makes you a part of that community? When you think about as a volunteer, are there places to volunteer that you find rewarding and a way to give back? And then is it fun? Is it a place where there are fun things to do? Obviously, Central Florida is known as a place where there are a lot of different things to do that are a lot of fun. Making sure that that's available in every community helps make it a valuable one. And those are those social domains that we were mentioning.
And are there programs here in Central Florida that are geared toward improving the social environment?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you can imagine, one of the main things that we do and one of the reasons that we have representation in local communities is just that. We want to first of all fight isolation. We want to give people a reason to get involved, to meet up, to meet us, to meet each other, to get involved. And so we have lots of programs. We do workshops, we do events, we collaborate with other partners, and we have events of our own. But at the end of the day, we all know that we have events, sometimes out of our control, things like pandemics, that then interrupt those things. So what do? We go virtual. And when that happens, we, like everyone else, we try to figure it out. And so one of the things that we can do is we help partners kind of figure it out by learning. And for us, we have the benefit of volume and size. So we created something called the Virtual Community Center. And that just is an aggregate of all of the AARP locations around the country, learning as we went along. Locally, what happened is that I would talk to partners and say, what are you finding? Are people showing up? When you do a virtual event, we're finding that people sign up, but then sometimes they don't show up. And I said, well, we're finding the same exact thing. What we have the benefit of is that we created this platform online called Virtual Community Center. And so we're finding that about half the people that sign up don't actually show up. But we were able to share that information with our partners. And that intelligence allowed them to make better decisions about at least what to expect. Luckily, we also were able to help local partners who had businesses of their own. One such story is a local partner called Firebush, Fit to Dance, Gloria Harris, who I have come to know throughout the pandemic. This is a local business, a woman of color who started her business as an older adult, who was showing up to nursing homes and using local community centers to engage older adults like herself to get fit. And what a wonderful mission to have. But guess what? Like everyone else, a small business owner, and here we are, into a pandemic, and she's trying to go virtual. She sent all of her instructors to get certified. She was doing things the right way, but she needed an audience. And through the Orange County Office on Aging, we were introduced. And I said, let's figure this out together. I can try to find you an audience. And we started working together. But again, through the benefit of the Virtual Community Center, we were able to take all of the other AARP locations across the country and aggregate those events so that once we were able to publish those things online, all of a sudden, instead of a few dozen or even a few hundred, at one time we had a few thousand people registering for this online class. And, this partnership has continued. So, I'm proud of partnerships like that we were able to help a local business.
So when people want to get engaged in these activities, how do they find out about them?
Yeah, so we, again, have the benefit of being able to promote events. Of course, we have ability to promote online. Of course, we have a website. We can publish on Twitter or on Facebook. We have e-newsletters that I send out personally, an e-newsletter to all of my volunteers locally. We have hundreds of volunteers who, during normal events where we can be out in public, they are just amazing. They want to be out, they want to help, they have such big hearts. And so I have that luxury that I can help people say, what is it that is your heart's content? What is it that you would love to do? And I have the pleasure of trying to figure out how to connect them with that goal. And I can be pretty creative, so let me go figure out how to do that. But I do the same thing when I meet a nonprofit who has a particular goal to meet. In the case of the business, who's the audience that you're trying to reach? If it's a nonprofit, who is the audience that you're trying to serve? And I will try to figure that out. So to me, I feel like AARP really has such a wide and such a wide scope of things that we could do and such a wide variety of people that we could serve. But at the end of the day, on a personal level, I feel like my mission is to try to connect those things. Try to connect the audience with the service or the partner with the audience, whatever it might be. And so that's a wonderful, kind of conundrum to be in because it is very satisfying.
And one of the things you mentioned, one of the domains that you mentioned was the communication domain.
Yes.
What is that about?
So, and the communication is just really getting messaging out because, particularly in times of a pandemic, you can imagine that there is a lot of confusion. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of fear. And it's no different than if you're in a caregiving situation where you might be faced with a diagnosis that is confusing to you. It's very scary. It could be anything like that. It could be, to you, that moment of a diagnosis that is unexpected is the most terrifying thing in the world. Just like a pandemic might be scary on a global level. Sometimes the pandemic is a scary diagnosis that you get on a personal level and is scary for you in that moment. So any of these things that happen, AARP can be that trusted source, and we pride ourselves on being able to connect reliable and trusted information to the community that we serve. So we connect with those reliable sources of information so that we can bring that information to our communities. So just the way Orange County did during the pandemic when the mayor was doing daily press releases, we also were doing teletown halls to bring information to our communities. We also, we know that Orange County does e-newsletters, just like this program brings information to the community. There are a variety of ways, so communication is key, and we want to be on that list of sources of communication that people trust.
How about the health domain? Because that's also, you mentioned getting a diagnosis.
Right.
And how about the health domain? What is that about?
Yeah, so
I mean, I think that so we think about health systems as being really important, and a lot of times when we think about the public health system, we're thinking about how we help with childhood immunizations or young families. But the reality is there's a very age-friendly component to health as well. And we also think in Florida a little more broadly about things like disaster preparedness and how you can be prepared if there's a hurricane that comes through Central Florida or some other disaster. And so I think Ingrid raised a really good example of how we use communication to try to spread information about what's going on. But it's also important for the people who run the health system in a particular community to be thinking about not only the young and the old, but everybody in between. And that is that age-friendly domain that we focus on with health.
Well, it is time for a short break, and when we come back, we'll focus on the domain centered around the built environment. We'll wrap up with examples that are working in other communities, and we'll tell you about resources to help your community get started. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this Vital Living Forum on livable communities. And in this segment, we'll focus on the domains centered around the built environment, everything from transportation and housing to places and spaces. And we'll also explore the network of resources that are available to communities to create environments that are adaptable to people at all ages and stages of life. Jeff and Ingrid, thanks for being with us again. Welcome back. So let's start with the built environment. What are each of those domains trying to accomplish?
So 3 domains that we're talking about in the built environment. One is housing. So we talk a lot, of course, in Florida about affordable housing, but accessible housing is also really important too. We can talk a little more about that. Transportation, and by transportation we don't just mean cars on the road, but just the full range of mobility options so that you can get around and stay engaged in your community. And then public spaces, so parks and buildings, and are they accessible and are they welcoming to people of all ages? Those are those 3 domains.
So when we talk about the housing, for instance, how is the housing domain being addressed here in Central Florida?
Let me talk a little bit just generally, and then Ingrid, if there are specifics in Central Florida to talk about. But I think that what we've seen across the state is a lot of interest in how we get more affordable housing, and that is a question, of course, across age spectrums. But then also how we make sure it's accessible. So, for instance, there are programs that can help people go in and retrofit their house so that their kitchen or their bathroom or their entrance is one that's accessible to them if they need a wheelchair at some point in their life, or if they just have a little more problems getting around. And so that program helps. At the same time, and I think you may have mentioned this earlier, there's an interest in multi-generational housing and how we make sure that the homes that we have are able to really accommodate people of different generations. That's another really valuable way that we can kind of address this housing question.
So here in Central Florida?
Yeah, I think that it's just an age-old question, and I think it comes up a lot. I know that we continue to just tackle it, but I think when the topic of housing comes up, it's that let's talk about it. Let's talk about where are we with affordable housing writ large, and we continue to have that discussion.
And how about the transportation domain? Because that also, particularly for people who are aging, who want mobility, and here in Central Florida, not so easy if you don't have a car.
Yeah, absolutely. And true of Florida, right? I mean, the whole state was pretty much built out after the highway came through. And so when you think about Central Florida, it's tough to get to the store if you don't have a car. It's tough to get to your place of worship or where you want to meet with friends if you don't have a car and if you're not comfortable driving. And frankly, there are roads here in Central Florida I'm not that comfortable driving on. So what are the options? Are there ways that we can build neighborhoods so that it's easier to get around if you're just walking or taking a bicycle? Or are there ways that we can provide mobility options that help people get from point A to point B in ways other than the car? And then I think safety is the other major thing. How do we make sure that the roads are safe, not just for drivers, but for people who are walking or who are biking? And so we talk about things like complete streets as a way to think about the roadways, not just for one way of getting around, but for all the ways of getting around.
And how about buildings and outdoor spaces? Are there considerations that we really need to be looking at?
Yeah, I think that we often think about parks as a place where we let our kids run off steam, which good thing that they're there, right? But at the same time, parks are a great place for people of all ages if we make it so. So for instance, there are other parts of the state where the age-friendly effort has included a parks guide for older adults that say, here are things that you might particularly like, or an assessment that says, you know, this park would be a lot better if there's a little more shade or a few more benches. Those sorts of small changes can have a big impact in making an outdoor space or a public space one that people of all ages want to take part in.
And is AARP working to make more livable spaces here in Central Florida?
Yeah, absolutely. And a big way that we do that is with a program called our Community Challenge. And it's an annual program that provides grants. And for these are for quick action projects. And it's an annual, not a competition, if you will, but it's an application process. And I personally remind everyone in my particular area of Central Florida, whenever the application process comes open, to please get your ideas in and try to see if you can get a grant if you have a project in mind. I'm not personally deciding who wins or anything, but I just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity because it's such an amazing program. I mean, in the last several years, almost $10 million has been given to a little over 800 projects that are quick action projects. Like, it's going to be done by the end of the year, so to speak. So it's like early in the spring, applications are accepted, and this is a project that's going to be done by the end of the year, so to speak. But it's amazing. So like last year, an Orange County project received a grant. It was Curry Ford West, and it was for safe social distancing park project. It was like a pop-up park that they did using pallets. And so on one day they did a safe and social distancing project where they had community come in and kind of paint pallets. So it was like it's community participation from beginning to end. And then they, on a different day, they took those beautifully painted and created pallets and then took them to this private lot, because there was a partnership involved, and then set up the pallets and then invited the public to come in. And it was just something simple, but it just showed how something simple like that, it creates community. And so that's just one example that, it could be where somebody just has an idea and here was an empty space that wasn't being used, and somebody had an idea of how can we invite community in. So that was just one example.
Have there been any Challenge Grant winners who have been service providers rather than built environment oriented companies?
Yeah, so kind of a combo, right? So the city of Orlando is getting a grant, and in their example, it's like underserved communities are getting these tables, and the tables are also going to be hotspots. So it's kind of a combination because, again, it is creating gathering space, it's creating community because people will come and use these tables, but they're going to have these like very artistic kind of shade structures built on top of the table, but the structure is actually creating a hotspot. So it's creating a service, right? Because not just gathering, not just community, but also hotspot and Wi-Fi provision. So it's delivering that service as well. So very, very unique, very creative.
That really is.
Yeah, and we get to fund that, you know what I mean? So I think it's really, really innovative.
So tell us about the online resources that have been assembled by AARP to help support some of the local efforts to build better communities.
Yeah, so I mean, around this whole endeavor, so just starting with livable communities, we have all kinds of resources. So, certainly anybody who's interested in just reading more about this, there's all kinds of resources. They're available in multiple languages of course, English and Spanish, as well as several other languages. Resources are available to download immediately, or if someone doesn't want to print them all off, you could just put your name and address and have them mailed to you. There are also infographics. There are booklets you can read. There are, just all kinds of stuff. And we also, I mentioned earlier, we also have our Facebook pages. There are many ways to engage with us. So if it's on this topic specifically, there are any number of ways. We also have our newsletters. And so that's another easy way, because then information is coming to you gradually. You would also then be alerted when the challenge grants are available, and that's always a nice thing to know. Right now, I think we have our conference going on, right? For Livable?
That's right. That's right. There are conferences and meetings, ongoing meetings of the different communities. And I think the national website, aarp.org/livable, has just a wealth of information. And certainly the Florida website, aarp.org/FL, has the Florida-specific information. Great resources, including those ongoing newsletters that'll let you know about what the latest and greatest is.
And also AARP has the Livability Index, which a lot of people use to research how livable a city is. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the index is interesting. I looked up my own neighborhood recently, because there's been a lot of changes in the area where I live in the last couple of years. So sometimes, when someone is thinking about moving to a new neighborhood, the obvious things people might look up, the school district and things like that. But when we're talking about livability, there's so much more. And we've mentioned several of the, the domains of livability. So it's a more holistic view of what one should consider and what you might consider. So the Livability Index takes all of those things into account. And that's what this score is all about. So on the aarp.org/livable, that URL we just mentioned, you can go in there and look up the Livability Index. You could just put in an address or simply just the zip code, and you can look it up. You can compare one zip code against another and just kind of do that comparison. And it's just really comprehensive to give you a better idea of all of these different elements, that one should consider, the safety, the access to health, all of these different things we've been talking about. So it's just a good way to kind of have a comparison if you're looking, or if you're considering for someone else. A lot of people are long distance caregivers, and you might be looking at different criteria if it's for a loved one versus yourself. So it's just a really good tool.
And we've seen, not only as individuals we look up so we can brag, with our friends, but realtors are using this as a way to help market properties. And we've actually seen businesses who are considering relocating their businesses saying to communities, your livability score is going to be a factor in whether we decide to move our headquarters to this place, because we want our workers and their families to have a great place to live.
Well, Jeff and Ingrid, thank you so much for giving us all this information on livable communities. And if you want to learn more about how you can help your community better adapt to the needs of all the people at all stages of life, check out the AARP Livable Communities website and the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities. Thanks for being with us.